Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. You're watching In Deep on the Delta, and today I'm going to talk about what I call the three-headed monster. Three baits, a variety of colors, weights, sizes, and some different rigging techniques. And when I do everything right, when I integrate everything properly, I will expect to catch approximately 80% of all the fish that I catch on that given day on one of those three baits. So with that, let's sit down and we'll talk about the three-headed monster. All right, so let's talk about this three-headed monster. And this is my system. You may have to expand on it or maybe even shorten it up a little bit, but I like to start off with three baits, and these are my three confidence baits. Now, the three baits represent the three-headed monsters, and like I said, if I do everything right, I'm going to catch most of my fish on these particularly three baits. Now, doesn't mean I'm only going to throw three baits, but these are my primary baits, and these primary baits may change day to day. So as fishing conditions change, your three baits will change. Let me tell you how I set up the three-headed monster, and I'll just give you the scenario that I have been doing out here on the California Delta for about the last 2 weeks. So here on the Delta, water temperatures are about 65-70 degrees. We are in springtime conditions, and there are fish out here that are pre-spawn, there are active fish that are spawning, and there's a few fish that are in post-spawn. These fish can be in 1 foot of water, or they can be in 10 feet of water. And here on the Delta, 10 feet is deep. So if you're fishing a lake, let's just say the fish may be in 1 foot of water to 30 feet of water. I need three baits that are going to cover that whole scenario of right up close into the tulies. I need something that I'm going to punch in there with. I'm going to need something to cover the deeper water where the bigger females may be out staging up to pre-spawn. A variety of techniques are going to be needed to cover all these situations. So here on the Delta, the three baits that I have chosen for the last week or so are a worm, basically a 6 or 7 inch Cinco, a chatterbait, and my third bait is a punch rig or a jig. And I considered my punch rig a jig. So let's start off with what I'll call my do everything bait, and it's simply a chatterbait. I'll generally have 2 rods set up with the chatterbait. And remember, I'm using 3 baits, but with these 3 baits, I'm going to have probably 7 rods. I'll have 3 or 4 rods with worms on them, rigged differently, different sizes, different weights, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. I'll have 2 chatterbait rods, and I will have 2 jig rods. So with that, when we talk about chatterbaits, let's talk about the variety of chatterbaits that I use and what a span that they can cover. They are a utility bait, and they can go from everything. I've got a small Z-Man Mini right here. I've got a Z-Man jackhammer, 2 fairly similar baits. I can fish this Mini on a spinning rod with 8 or 10 pound test, and I could put this in very shallow water, and I can throw it in places under very calm conditions where if I throw a bigger bait, it's going to spook the fish. So I might start off on a day like today where there's very little breeze with a very small chatterbait and maybe a jackhammer. Now, the trend in the last couple of years are going to bigger blades. If the wind comes up or I'm in deeper water, I may go to a bigger bladed chatterbait, and the granddaddy of all big bladed chatterbaits, if the wind's up, the fish are aggressive, I'm going to throw this big donkey slayer. That's when I'm looking for the big fish. But there we have 4 different sizes of chatterbaits that I can use to cover various situations. One bait but 4 different weights, 4 different sizes. Now the colors to me, when I'm choosing my worms, my chatterbaits, or my jigs, I'm going to try to match crayfish, bluegill, and then whatever bait fish is most prevalent here on the Delta, which a lot of times is either the shad or maybe the golden shine or a split tail. Now, wherever you're fishing, you're going to want to match the colors that are in the bait in your particular water. So with that, I've got 2 rods. I've got maybe 4 different sizes of chatterbaits and maybe 3 or 4 different colors and maybe 3 or 4 different sizes, and that's going to be my utility rod. I can throw those, make long cast, I can cover a lot of water with that. Now once I get dialed in, I'm going to go to a worm rod. Now when I fish worms, I generally have at least 3 worm rods set up. And one of them is going to be just a wacky 6-inch Senko unweighted. And we're going to go over why I have 4 worm rods. Wacky 6-inch Senko weighted. I'm going to have, or excuse me, unweighted. We're going to have a 6-inch Senko with an inline worm hook that is unweighted. I'll probably have a T-rig set up with a worm. And then I might have a drop shot with the worm on it. Now, why is this important? And again, I'll use 5, 6, and 7-inch Senkos. I'll use robo worms. Doesn't matter what brand you're using. Again, the colors, green pumpkin, black with blue flake, standard colors, margarita mutilators. But when I get into a situation where I'm moving down the bank, and this is maybe one of the most important things in this whole video, whether I'm throwing a chatterbait, a jig, or a worm, to be able to adjust my techniques to what's in front of me. So if I'm moving down the bank and I see some spots, bare spots up in a foot of water that I think there's going to be some spawning fish, I'm going to move back away from that area. I may throw a 5-inch wacky Senko because maybe I see some flat bottom with not a lot of vegetation. So I may throw this unweighted Senko and pitch it up there and see if I can't get one of those fish to hit it while it's falling. If I'm looking for fish that are aggressive and they're on worms that are falling, I'll always go wacky. Now if I see those same fish up there, but it's very, there's a lot of vegetation, or I have to throw something in vegetation, then I'm going to throw this inline unweighted worm hook, or inline worm hook, unweighted, same basic worm, but this is going to be totally weedless, and I could throw it up there and pull it through the vegetation. Why is this important to have these 2? And these are my standard 2 worms, is because as I'm going down the bank and I'm looking at what's in front of me, I need to be able to pick up one rod and make 2 casts with it and then go back to the second rod, depending on what I'm seeing in front of me. You have to be able to change up real quick. Now, if I'm going down that same bank and I find that there's a big deep trough in there, I may use a slightly weighted T-rig, or if I'm fishing the outside of the vegetation, I'll use a T-rig type of deal where I may use a little more weight because I'm fishing in 8 or 10 feet of water. 4 different worms there, and also I can change out any of those with a split shot type rig, or I can use a drop shot, and that would be for the deeper water if I'm on the outside edges. So I have 4 different rods rigged up with worms, and I can cover 90% of everything that is in front of me. Now, if there are areas that I can't throw a worm in, that's when the punch rod comes in and my jig rod. Now I consider, you know, a standard punch rod is, you know, basically it's a T-rigged weight with most guys use a punch hook. I use generally 1.25 ounce weight throughout the summer, especially early in the summer when a lot of the down stuff is not growing real thick. I can get an ounce or 1.25 ounces through most of that. And I use an inline worm hook. Now, right now I have a bronco bug on here. It can be a beaver. You can put a skirt on it. You can do anything you want. I consider this a jig. Yes, the technique is different because I'm punching, but this is a jig. The only thing is the head of the jig is not attached to the hook, and it doesn't have a skirt on it. So you can agree with me on that, or you can disagree with me on that. But when I need to get in and get deep into vegetation, I always want to have a punch rod. I don't necessarily enjoy punching all that much. But I'll tell you what, if you're here on the Delta and you're not punching, you're missing out on some really big fish. Now the other jig rod that I will have is this guy right here. Now is it a traditional jig? No, it's not. It's a Bronco Bug inline worm hook. Oh, and by the way, I like to punch with that inline worm hook. I don't want that hook kicking up every time I'm pulling it through vegetation, because all that does is foul up and it causes me headaches hooking up and destroying baits when I'm pulling them through the cover. So that's why I use that inline worm hook, and I have an excellent hookup rate. This is another inline worm hook here. I have a skirt on it, and I have a T-rig weight set up. Now I can change this weight out anytime I want it, and this is pegged, and this is a bait that I flip. Now, can I flip this into super heavy cover where I can punch? No, but on the outsides of tules and things where I might need a little more weight, I can't get a worm in there, I can take this and I could pitch this jig in there. The other thing that I could do with this jig that doesn't necessarily always work on a worm is I can pitch it out, and I could hop it back to the boat. I can move this jig a lot quicker. Again, I can change the size and the color of this. Generally, I'm fishing this in something that is going to represent a crayfish, but I can change the weight on it. I can make long casts. I can throw it out in deep water. I could throw it in shallow water. And that is my three-headed monster. So what I'll have is a punch rod and a jig rod, fishing heavy cover. I'll have 4 worm rods, unweighted and weighted worms, wacky worms, and maybe drop shots. And you adjust this to your particular fishing situation. It doesn't have to be my bait. You know, you guys that know Randy Pringle, the fishing professor, I talked to Randy many years ago, and he said, you know, you can't catch another man's fish. And I really didn't take that to heart until several years later, and I kind of thought about that all the time. And what Randy says, you know, I can show you, go out there and tell you that this is the bait to use and blah, blah, blah. And we've all done this, you know, okay, I got the secret bait now. And you get out there and you can't catch fish like Randy's catching them. Or if I tell you I'm catching them on this donkey slayer, you might not be able to catch fish on the donkey slayer. You may be throwing a Z-Man jackhammer, and that may be your bait. So a lot of times you can't catch another man's fish. And also, these baits, like I say, will change sometimes day to day. You know, we talked about a couple of punch rods, we talked about a couple of worm rods, I'm talking about a couple of chatterbait rods now. I might take those punch rods and I might switch those out with crankbaits in a day or two. Just depends on what's happening with the situation as it evolves. Now, I do not advocate just fishing 3 baits. What I do advocate is becoming familiar with and having confidence in a wide variety of baits, so that when you come out, you can take a look at conditions, where you're going to be fishing, the depths you'll be fishing, the tides you'll be fishing, so on and so forth. Make your decision on putting your three-headed monster up on the deck so that it's uncluttered. You know where everything's at. You can grab it really quick. You can grab one rod, take one cast, and that one cast is for a very specific location. You pull in, you drop that rod, then you pick up your next rod to fish your next location. So we've got those 3 rods, or excuse me, those 3 baits on your deck. I advocate having a backup plan with a couple of rods, maybe sitting, you know, in your stow area, not under deck, but out on your deck, so that as you come up and you're fishing, and maybe that three-headed monster isn't working, from time to time you're going to come back and then try another bait or so. But the more confidence you have in a wider variety of baits is always going to be a good thing. And the other thing, by rigging with different rigs, worm rigs and weights and things, you can really expand the areas that you fish with that three-headed monster, rather than just having one chatterbait on, one worm, and maybe a punch rod. By having several different rigs, you can expand that, and most of the time, I kind of feel that any given 3 given baits, as long as I know how to use them and I have some different rigging techniques, I can cover about 80 to 90% of everything that I'm going to encounter when it comes to bass fishing. So with that, if you have any questions, make sure you give me a holler in the comments, and I try to answer all of the questions that I get. If you go out, choose your own baits, think about this a little bit, make yourself a little more efficient, and I guarantee you, you're going to catch more fish when you get your three-headed monster together. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys on the river.